The next time you're reaching for a bottle of iced tea, sparkling water, or maybe a sports drink, I really want you to look at it just a little bit differently. Most of the time, we just see a refreshing drink, right? A quick caffeine boost or some much-needed hydration. But what's actually inside that product, beyond just the liquid you're drinking? Today, we're going to completely unpack the hidden realities of the non-alcoholic beverage industry, breaking down the massive, truly global systems required to put that single bottle right there in your hand.
To really wrap our heads around this, we have to ask ourselves a pretty fundamental question. What is the true cost of a beverage? And I'm definitely not talking about the $1.99 price tag you see on the grocery store shelf. We are looking way beyond that consumer cost to understand the massive environmental and financial footprints these products leave behind. We're going to examine the whole shebang, from the literal petroleum making up the plastic shell on the outside, all the way to the highly vulnerable agricultural crops sitting on the inside.
Okay, let's dive into this. The framework we're using for our explainer today comes directly from the SASB standards, which are now officially part of the International Sustainability Standards Board under the IFRS Foundation. And this is absolutely crucial because this isn't just theory or some clever marketing fluff. This is the definitive, standardized sustainability accounting standard. It is exactly what global markets, investors, and top-tier analysts use to measure how the world's largest food and beverage companies are managing their real-world risks. So here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with the beverage industry footprint. Number 2, measuring packaging weight. Number 3, the packaging life cycle. 4, sourcing underwater stress. And finally, number 5, the value of transparency. Let's kick things off with Section 1, the beverage industry footprint. Section 2, measuring packaging weight. So to actually manage their packaging impact, companies have to follow a very specific mandate. It's SASB metric FB/NB 410A.1, which covers packaging lifecycle management. These are incredibly strict, standardized data points requiring companies to disclose the total weight of all their purchased packaging. It basically forces a strict quantitative reality onto something we usually just toss right into a recycling bin without a second thought. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how the standard actually requires this total weight to be reported. It has to be in metric tons. Let's anchor that abstraction for a second. 1 single metric ton is roughly the weight of a small car. Now consider the fact that a major beverage company might use well over 3 million metric tons of plastic in a single year. That is literally a traffic jam of 3 million cars made entirely out of empty bottles. We're talking about an astronomical amount of physical mass being extracted, molded, and shipped all over the globe. But what exactly gets weighed in that metric? Well, the standard is super precise. Companies have to calculate the total weight of 2 distinct things. First, primary packaging. This is the material in direct contact with the product, like the actual plastic bottle or the aluminum can itself. Second is secondary packaging, which contains one or more of those primary packages. Think of the cardboard rings or that plastic shrink wrap holding your six-pack together. Notably, this explicit calculation actually excludes tertiary packaging, like those massive wooden pallets they use for bulk transport. Moving inward, let's look at Section 3, the packaging life cycle. Under the SASB standard, beverage companies can't just stop at total weight. They actually have to break that packaging weight down. Picture it like a giant pie chart of a company's total metric tonnage. One slice of that pie is traditional virgin material, newly extracted straight from the earth. The next slice is recycled materials, stuff they've actually recovered from the waste stream. And the final slice is renewable materials. The core idea here is pretty simple. The larger those last 2 slices are, the less the company is relying on finite fossil fuels just to make its bottles. And hey, we can't just throw around corporate buzzwords here. The standard strictly defines what counts as renewable materials. It absolutely must be composed of biomass from a living source, like trees, crops, or even algae, that is actively replenished at a rate greater than or at least equal to its rate of depletion. This incredibly strict definition stops companies from greenwashing their reports right in their tracks. If it doesn't meet this exact biological replenishment criteria, there's no way it can be claimed as renewable packaging weight. The standard then requires completely closing the loop, because it's not just about what the packaging is made from, it's about what it's designed for at the end of its life. Companies must disclose the exact percentage of their packaging, by weight, that falls into 3 specific end-of-life categories: First, is it recyclable, meaning can it be collected and processed back into raw materials? Second, is it reusable for its original purpose through some sort of collection program? Or third, is it compostable, where it safely degrades in a municipal facility? This specific data reveals whether a company is actually planning for a circular economy or if they are just in the business of generating really, really expensive permanent trash. Let's pivot slightly for Section 4, Sourcing Underwater Stress.
Now, there is a fascinating contrast here. When we just looked at the outside packaging, the environmental impact was measured by physical weight in metric tons. But when we look at the liquid ingredients inside the bottle, the impact is actually measured as financial risk, specifically as a percentage by cost. This creates a brilliant bridge between environmental reality and financial vulnerability. Think about it. If a key ingredient suddenly becomes incredibly scarce due to a massive drought, the cost of that ingredient skyrockets, which directly impacts the company's bottom line.
Which brings us to our next critical metric, code FB-NB-440A.1, ingredient sourcing. This particular metric is perfectly designed to expose a company's hidden reliance on vulnerable agricultural inputs. Look, global supply chains fluctuate wildly these days with resource scarcity and climate change. So this data point essentially forces beverage companies to admit exactly how much of their supply chain is built on top of regions that are, quite literally, running out of water. And again, the definition here is incredibly rigorous. The standard actually relies on the World Resources Institute's aqueduct tool to define what constitutes baseline water stress. Companies have to map out their suppliers and identify if they're operating in regions classified as having high water stress, which means 40 to 80% of the available water is already being withdrawn, or extremely high stress, meaning over 80% of the available water in that region is already spoken for. So the crucial point is that beverage companies must report the exact percentage of their agricultural ingredients sourced from these highly stressed regions, measured by cost for their direct Tier 1 suppliers. If a massive chunk of a company's spend is completely tied up in regions experiencing severe, ongoing droughts, well, investors immediately know that company faces massive risks of supply disruption and price volatility. It's a very direct, undeniable measure of supply chain fragility. Finally, let's bring it all together in Section 5, the value of transparency. And this brilliantly illustrates how corporate reporting actually works. It doesn't view these elements in isolation. They are presented side by side as a complete visual breakdown. Beverage companies must report the total physical weight of their packaging in metric tons, right alongside the precise percentages of recycled, renewable, recyclable, reusable, or compostable materials. But then, they have to couple this directly with the metric detailing the percentage of beverage ingredients sourced from high or extremely high baseline water stress regions, calculated by cost. They sit right next to each other because they both represent incredibly material financial realities for the business. So what is the big takeaway for you here? Why does all this specialized reporting actually matter? Well, it matters because relying heavily on drought-prone regions for your main ingredients completely destroys your supply chain resiliency and practically guarantees cost volatility. Simultaneously, pumping millions of metric tons of non-recyclable, non-renewable packaging out into the world creates massive regulatory and reputational risk. Managing these two factors side by side isn't just about being green anymore, it's about basic corporate survival. I really want to leave you with this final thought today. If a beverage company's core ingredients simply dry up because of severe water stress, and its packaging permanently piles up in landfills because it isn't renewable or recyclable, what is the actual long-term value of that business? It's a tough question, but it's one that every savvy investor is starting to ask. And thanks to standardized data, we finally have the tools to find the real answer. I highly encourage you to go pull up a corporate sustainability report for your absolute favorite beverage brand and see exactly how they stack up.